What's up, guys? This is Kay from UFG. We're here checking out Cat Secretary, and you are?
I'm Chris. I'm a producer on the game.
So can you tell us about Cat Secretary? What's it all about and everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Cat Secretary, you are a stray cat feeling really low on a rainy day in your box on the street, and you decide as you see a couple enjoying a nice roof over their heads, thinking that, the way to get there is gainful employment. It's the best way to find a good home in this economy especially. So you sneak into the Docs Media headquarters and you hire yourself. It creates a bit of a problem, but even though there's been a hiring freeze at the company because they're replacing humans with AI and bots, well, you're a cat, so you're not a human, so it kind of breaks the logic, and somehow you find yourself hired as the secretary. You do your secretarial duties during the day, fixing the coffee, helping make sure the router works, and at night, you sneak throughout the company and slowly but surely help your coworkers and try to kind of unplug the company from its current digital takeover.
Okay, awesome. Love the message there. What gave the idea of a cat secretaries and being anti-AI in the game?
Well, the anti-AI I can answer very easily in that half of our team and the interactive side at the company is about 10 of us. Half of us had not worked on video games before. We're game fans. I'm an actor first and foremost, have been an actor for 12 years. A bunch of the team are script writers who've been working on scripts for a very long time. And all of us, in one way or another, over the last 4 years before Good Story Guild was founded, have all lost jobs to AI. I've literally been replaced on projects that I'd had for years doing audiobooks at publishing houses where they've now moved towards just using a digital AI voice rather than an actual human. Script writers who've lost jobs because it was easier to just use a program to write a more generic script than pay a human to do it kind of thing. So that's why you have the anti-AI sentiment, because quite literally, a lot of us at this job, and even some of the artists and whatnot, I mean, if you go to GDC nowadays, half of the booths showing there are AI programs that are basically designed to replace your art team. So there's very much it resonates with the entire team.
Oh, just want to say first off, sorry to hear about, you guys losing your jobs and everything, but you know what? You guys are making a beautiful piece of art right here.
Thank you, we're trying.
How did this cat breed get chosen as the protagonist for this game?
It kind of just happened. So the original almost, I guess, proto concept, when we first had an interactive team and it was just 2 people. I wasn't involved yet. It was kind of an offshoot of what the major part of Good Story Guild had been, which is we produce a lot of scripted audio content, basically like radio plays for podcasts. And one of our co-founders was like, you know what, I wonder what it would be like to start learning Unreal. And they worked off of this idea of like a Papers, Please where you were a cat working a desk secretary job and doing the can you send people to the right office for the right gig kind of thing.
Okay.
For the right appointment. And weirdly, as we were messing with that idea in a 3D space, we just kept asking ourselves, I was helping QA at the time, we just kept going well, this office seems interesting. What would it be like to be a cat in this office? And then that kind of just kept expanding, and then we kind of had this scope creep of what would it be like if you were really working in this office and helping out during the day and night? Because if you're a cat, you're probably living at the office.
Oh yeah.
And that's it. So it sort of happened organically, but also in a weird way where all of a sudden we're a year in and we're I guess we're making this cat secretary thing.
Oh yeah.
So it was a very bizarre little kind of process, but that's in a nutshell kind of what happened.
Now this one's a pretty silly question.
Go for it.
But can the cats loaf in the game or do any cat-like activities other than solving mysteries and other puzzles 100%. And stuff?
You can meow at all of your coworkers and get them to pet you. You can just sit down and do a bit of a butt scoot if you want to. You can knock most of our in-game actors off shelves and stuff. That means books, plants, stuff like that. A lot of them are physics-based so that you can just bat them away with your paw. You can also bat at the different NPCs if you want to and get reactions out of them.
Oh my gosh, that's really funny. Lastly, I want to ask, what was your favorite part of the development?
Honestly, one of my favorite parts, because look, working on a game for the first time, it is a lot more stressful. I was always told it's stressful, but it is a very non-linear process where you add something into the game and then it will break 10 other things. So it doesn't feel like a lot of other media projects where you add something in, it's advancing. Always almost at a guarantee. There's a lot more back and forth in game dev. Genuinely, one of the most incredible things is when we finally got voiceover and sound into the game, we'd had, and also our UI, those are two elements of flavor that once they were in, it made the world feel alive. We had spent all this time building these assets and building this world, to no fault of anyone who'd been working on the game, it felt hollow because it wasn't reacting to you as a player. But now when you hit a button, there's a sound effect. When you interact with something, it reacts to you. And those, it's weird, it's the smallest details, but it's those details that let the game truly feel like it's actually a world that's living. And so that's been the most incredible thing, because it took us a long time to get there. And once it happened, it was suddenly like, oh my gosh, what we've been working on for all this time, it's really finally happening. That was a really cool moment. It happened about a couple months ago when we got all that sounded.
That's awesome. I can't wait to play the game. Where can we play this, and when can we expect a launch?
So right now we don't have a demo out publicly. We're hoping to have one in the next couple months available on Steam. The game will release on Steam first. We're aiming for the summer. Last year we said we were aiming for the fall, and we added too much stuff, and so we've been polishing. So we're hoping to be available for the summer. TBD on an official date, because we are in the polish mode, and we want to try to have as much cleaned up as possible before we put it out there for people.
Should we hope for a demo really soon, though?
Yes, we're hoping, like I said, in the next, we're hoping by, fingers crossed, May we have a demo, but no guarantees. We want it to be fully functioning. We don't want to send something broken.
Yeah, no, don't worry. But also a demo is where we get to try out the stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
We're hoping.
All right, but thank you for having me play this game.
Thank you so much for coming by.
And the game again is Cat Secretary. Don't forget, guys, to like and sub, and catch us for the next game. See you guys later.
Thank you.